talking about social protection, so to say, with a focus on Kenya. And there are some important concepts we need to reflect about when we talk about social protection. Things like affluence testing. This is defined as a form of means testing, that aims to exclude the affluent rather than identifying the poor. Okay, so when you're trying to establish who to include in the social protection program, you do what is called affluence testing, designed to purposely exclude the affluent rather than identifying the poor. We also have terms such as basic income grants, and the basic income grant would be a transfer income paid to all residents, all citizens, independent of their need. Okay. And this was actually considered during the COVID situation, and whether it would be possible to dispatch monies directly to individuals. And in social protection, a beneficiary would be an individual or a household that is receiving benefits at a specific point in time. And in many cases, beneficiaries are individuals, though it is the case that benefits can be paid to households and families. Sometimes we have things like cash transfers, which are usually regular and predictable, provided by government from tax financing, or sometimes they're provided by non-governmental organizations to individuals, families, and households. Now, we talked of affluence testing and talked of exclusion of the affluent and not necessarily identifying the poor. We also have such a thing as exclusion errors. And exclusion errors can be quantified as the proportion of intended beneficiaries who are omitted from a social transfer program. Okay. So affluence testing, exclusion errors, these are terms that are generally used in social protection. In social protection, we also use the term inclusion errors. And these inclusion errors can be quantified as the proportion of a program's beneficiaries receiving transfers who are not in the intended beneficiary group. A few weeks ago, we had an incident in Rongai where the foodstuff distribution associated to the COVID strain allowed the chiefs to list individuals who were considered to be needy. And in Rongai, a number of chiefs listed people who are not necessarily needy, just because there are people from within their ethnic grouping. So this lady is driving her Harrier and receives this message: report to this place and pick your foodstuffs. Anyway, so this lady picks along a Mama Mboga who had not been working for some time and goes with her to this point to receive the foodstuff, and told these people, I don't know who listed my number here, but I don't deserve this food that is being given out. It turned out that several other people of her caliber had been included as beneficiaries when they are not supposed to be receiving the said intervention. There's also something called inclusive life cycle approach. And this is a social protection system that provides transfers which address risks and challenges across the life cycle and which are accessible to citizens across each stage in the life cycle. Now, when a life cycle system is inclusive, it is provided to all or most of the citizens in that category. Yeah. Then the word safety net is used always. And the safety net measures to catch, includes the measures to catch those who experience a shock or a crisis and would need to access social protection. So things are going on well, but when we get this shake-up of COVID, a shake-up of a natural disaster, do we have a safety net that will allow people not to fall down completely through social protection? We also have social care services, and these would be services that are provided to the most vulnerable members of society in view to protecting them. They are usually based around a social work system, and this can include areas such as child protection, but also the system of institutional care for older persons and orphanages. Then in the area of social assistance, these would be social protection schemes for those living in poverty and financed from national taxation. They are often not a right, and yet in Kenya, we call it the right to social security. So they're often not a right and are usually based on a charity model. As a result, many citizens cannot access them when they are in need. Okay? So as we said, it is possible for you to treat social protection and this kind of assistance as a benevolent act or as a charitable act. But with the provisions in our constitution, it would seem that those who are entitled to social protection should demand from duty bearers that right. There is also a term we call social protection flow. And this social protection flow is a commitment to provide lifestyle schemes that are available to all citizens when in need. So social protection flow is a commitment to provide life cycle schemes that are available to all citizens when in need, particularly the issue of basic income security for children to enable them access nutrition, education, care, and any other necessary goods and services. Basic income security for persons in active age who are unable to earn sufficient income, in particular in cases of sickness, unemployment, maternity, and disability. And finally, basic income security for older persons. This would be kind of reflection on the social protection flow, schemes that are making sure the bare minimum is available with regard to income security for children, persons of active age who are incapable of earning, and for older persons. I think it is also important to understand what vulnerability would be. It would be complex as a concept. It is also multidimensional, but generally relates to the exposure of people. Vulnerability relates to the exposure of people to a shock or process linked to their ability to manage the hazard. So, ability to manage the hazard is the measure of whether one is vulnerable or not, whether a household is vulnerable or not. So Kenya has been working on social protection for some good time now, especially with the coming in of the 2010 constitution. We can no longer say it is a new constitution. By 2017, overall around 1,020,000 households were in receipt of a regular and predictable social assistance transfer, mainly in the form of cash, but a smaller number continued to receive food transfers on the Food for Assets scheme. And this is close to 12% of all households. While it is also the case that 39% of the population is able to access the National Hospital Insurance Fund. Now, this looks like an impressive coverage, given that the first core social assistance scheme in Kenya started in 2004, and the majority of the population is still unable to access social protection, and it therefore impacts negatively on their well-being. As well as national social cohesion and economic growth. Now, it is argued that Kenya has a high proportion of the population on middle incomes, so-called missing middle, who are actually unable to access benefits. So also legislation for social protection is available, starting with the Constitution of Kenya 2010, which offers every Kenyan the right to social security. And this provides a firm and legal basis to efforts by the government to expand the social protection sector. But the National Social Protection Policy uses a broad definition of social protection. And this may make it difficult to explain to policymakers and the general public, ending up hindering the gaining of further popular and political support. The financing of social protection in Kenya shows that there has been regular and predictable cash transfers and these cash transfers have grown to a level of up to 83% of social assistance expenditure. And this change can be attributed to government's own investment, which is also considered positive for sustainability. Now, we are also familiar with the Inua Jamii Senior Citizens Program, which has also increased from tax-financed social transfers to up to 0.4 of GDP. Now, the Kenyan budget is how many trillion dollars? Is it 3, 4? So 0.4% of GDP would be something substantial. It is also the case that in Kenya, there has been the development of scalable social protection to respond to things like drought. And this has become a model for benchmarking for several other nations. It is desirable that cash transfers become scalable, and it is the case that there are financing options that would expand tax-financed social protection further. It is also feasible to increase investment to 1% of GDP. The investment case for social protection is integral to achieving inclusive growth and development, and its contribution to the realization of the desired vision of the state. For sure, National Social Security Fund and the National Hospital Insurance Fund have a turnover of between 0.2 and 0.3% of GDP, while the Civil Service Pension Scheme requires an annual spending equivalent to 0.6% of GDP. So you realize that these social protection schemes are all under 1% of GDP, but have the potential to improve social inclusion and economic inclusion. You've heard the president just thumping about the cash transfers that have taken place during COVID. And he seems to make the case that sending money directly to people is as effective as injecting more money into the economy during difficult times, so that progressively people are able to deal with their own problems by making their own choices. Now, with regard to coverage and access to social protection, we know that social assistance programs have been directed to areas with the highest poverty rates, though not necessarily to those counties with the largest numbers of people in poverty. So the decision of where to direct most of the social assistance programs is based on areas with the highest poverty rates, not to counties with the largest numbers of people with poverty. Nairobi could have a large number of people with poverty, yet it doesn't have the highest poverty rate. As a result, households in arid lands are 3 times more likely to be registered for social assistance schemes compared with the rest of the country. There are also significant geographic disparities in the coverage of health insurance, with the highest prevalence in areas where the formal economy workforce is largest. Now, coverage of social protection schemes across life cycle categories of the population is variable. It varies from place to place and from age and lifestyle. So among children, priority by the Department for Social Protection, priority has been on reaching the orphans, with the majority of children excluded from the system, in particular the very youngest. Among the working age adults, an estimated 7% live in households that receive social transfers, while some 15% of formal and informal workers aged between 18 and 65 years have an employer contributing to or providing the National Social Security pension payments. Now, among the older people, around 31% of those aged 65 years and over receive an old age pension. Although with the introduction of the Inua Jamii Senior Citizens Program that started in 2018, the number of older people rose to over 70%, and that persons with disabilities remain largely underserved, with an estimated coverage of less than 1% among children and those of working age. Now, these things we are talking about relate to what is happening currently in the country with regard to social protection. I would invite you to keep reflecting on how these numbers reflect in your own county, in your own rural home. Of course, as already indicated, probably Larry might be more able to demonstrate whether these things are taking place, especially the cash transfers, since it is the case that government acknowledges that arid territories are likely to be 3 more times attended to in social protection than any other part of the country, mainly because of the poverty rates known in the number of people living in poverty. So in Kenya, government chose to build a life cycle social protection system, combining both tax-financed and contributory mechanisms. And this is basically in line with the approach that has been adopted by developed countries and several other developing countries with more mature systems. But it is also true that government has had to reduce the coverage of the categories of the population it can support due to insufficient funding. And this necessarily creates challenges which makes it acute in identifying beneficiaries. Most schemes target those living in poverty, although the Inua Jamii Senior Citizens Program is offered to all citizens over 65. Now, the evidence available indicates that there are challenges in the effectiveness of the selection of beneficiaries across most of the social protection programs. And the government, in making efforts to strengthen the targeting by developing what is called a harmonized targeting tool and an attempt to introduce more inclusive schemes. Now, contributory schemes are able to incorporate some members of the workforce in the informal economy, but also support from the general government revenues is always necessary if the coverage is to be extensive. It is also the case that the National Hospital Insurance Fund is making use of subsidies to incorporate those outside the formal economy into the scheme, including the offering of support to those receiving social assistance schemes. Now, the delivery of social protection schemes comes out in the following way. There has been a strengthening in the administrative processes and systems of the social assistance schemes. Now, this would include the building of a common operating framework that consolidates and harmonizes program delivery through the National Safety Net Program. There have also been significant improvements in the program and national management information systems, all which include the introduction of what is now known as the single registry. Nonetheless, challenges abound because there is always need for further capacity development and training. There's always need for stronger local implementation structures. The contributory schemes such as National Security Fund and the National Hospital Insurance Fund have invested in further developing their operational systems, and they are taking advantage of the effectiveness and efficiency of modern technology to deliver better services. For sure, there has been cost efficiency and value for money in the social protection sector. The impact of social assistance programs has grown as the cash transfers have expanded, and thereby reducing the more ad hoc food-based transfers. There was an impact evaluation that was done When was this? 2017, I think. No, 2018 years. The impact evaluation showed a positive effect in health, education, including reduction in child labor, positive effects in the labor market, participation, savings and credit, resilience to shocks, and women's empowerment. So it is the case that programs are increasing the capacity of the Kenyan labor force, and they have stimulated investment in assets and local economic growth. But the impacts would increase if there was higher coverage and improved targeting of those who would be included in the social protection program. Now, cost efficiency has also improved due to increased coordination and the consolidation of the delivery within the Inua Jamii program, and also by the use of electronic transfers. So by the time COVID took place and people were shaken up, already the Department for Social Protection had a database of those who are considered to be vulnerable, or those who are considered to be qualifying for this kind of support. And it is these people that have already been receiving this kind of support. So we have to ask ourselves whether this social protection sector is sustainable. Now, significant progress has been made when you look through the government data. You can see there's progress that has been made in enhancing sustainability of the social protection sector. And it is highly unlikely that the gains made can be reversed. For sure, social protection is now a well-known and a popular sector across Kenya, and there is a growing demand. Many proposals in the National Social Protection Policy of 2012 have been implemented, even though it is the case that there are others that remain to be realized. Importantly, more needs to be done to embed social protection within legislation. Opposition to some of the legislative reforms to the National Social Security Fund and the Civil Service Pension Scheme needs to be handled. Some people think that overburdening the workers at this point in time might be counterproductive. So yes, more has to be done for the gains to be sustainable, and more has to be done for management and coordination of the sector to have it strengthened. Now, we need to think about certain segments of the social protection sector. With regard to adequacy and equity of social protection schemes. But I'd like to find out from you if any of you is familiar with these social protection schemes as they are. Has anyone interacted with the social protection schemes as they are? Larry?
Yes.
Government seems to say that people in areas such as where you serve are more likely to be on the social protection schemes. How does it take place where you are?
Well, I've not been a direct beneficiary, but I've observed that the national government, through the office of the DCC, that is the Deputy County Commissioner,
Yes.
and also through NDMA, National Drought Management Authority, remain key channels of realizing the benefits of these schemes to the beneficiaries. For instance, you through the office of Deputy County Commissioner, of course, that one goes down to the chiefs and sub chiefs or assistant chiefs. I have seen that they target the elderly, those people over 65 years, in terms of accessing food. And this one also goes to NDMA. I've also seen that they give the cash transfer to the elderly people and also the people living with disabilities and also the orphans. I think it is true it is happening, but see, as you had said earlier, the challenge is the selection process of the beneficiaries and also the question of sustainability.
So there are many inclusion errors, exclusion errors, and you are unsure about the question of sustainability.
Right.
Now, our course is local government and social welfare services. I'd like to find out from you, all of you in the call, whether there is any reason why this social protection has not been devolved. As you can hear from what Larry is saying, social protection is still controlled from the national government. Why do you think counties are not being given this role? Winnie?
I'm thinking that counties are not yet prepared to handle such a big thing. They don't have the plan, the policies, and the strategies to go about it.
Okay. So it is a capacity issue?
They don't have.
Larry, do you think that the county government of Turkana does not have capacity to do what the DCC is doing?
I don't think so. I may answer it in twofold. That is yes and no. I think at the county levels, I'm not sure if even the people at the counties are aware of this social protection.
Mm.
If there was mass awareness, if many people knew these things exist and they can demand from those who are supposed to be availing these schemes to the people.
Mm.
And secondly, I don't know why it is in the national government per se,
Mm.
because based on the devolution concept, these things need to be devolved at the county levels. The only thing that needs to be strengthened is the structures,
Mm.
so that they become seamless and made effective and efficient.
Mm.
Right.
Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the legislative and the policy framework for social protection. The legislative and policy framework for social protection. As we had mentioned earlier, Article 43(1)(e) of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 states that every person has a right to social security. And Article 43(3), meaning Article 43 sub-Article 3, stipulates that the state shall provide appropriate social security to persons who are unable to support themselves and their dependents. Now, by stipulating these rights, the people of Kenya affirm commitments by their state to the citizens, arising most fundamentally from its conformity as a member of the United Nations to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but also as a states party to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It is also the case that Kenya has ratified several international conventions that require the extension of social security to specific categories of the population, including social security for all children, as stipulated by the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now remember that under Article 2.5 and Article 2.6 of the Constitution, the international instruments that Kenya has ratified become part of the law of the country, whether there is domestic legislation or not. by the mere fact that it has been ratified, it becomes part of the law. For sure, we have a treaties ratification document, a law on treaties ratification. I think it's a 2012 law. But in general, whatever Kenya has ratified forms part of the law. So Kenya, having ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which extends Social Security to cover children, also the Social Security, right to Social Security for women, that is covered in the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the social protection of persons with disabilities, stipulated in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. All these conventions that contain social protection for the categories of people pointed out there impose an obligation on Kenya as a state party to adhere or to conform to those provisions. So therefore, within Kenya, Social Security is recognized as an entitlement that all citizens should be able to access, whenever they are in need. It is also important, however, to recognize that the right to Social Security is to be realized progressively over time. It is argued that the developed nations took many decades to build their current systems. Now, Kenya's Vision 2030 places Social Security as a key player in its realization, because the vision aims to provide a high quality of life for all citizens by the year 2030. Meanwhile, emphasizing a just and cohesive society with social equity. Now, these priorities cannot be achieved without a significant level of investment in social protection, as well as other core services such as would be health, education, transport, housing, and social care. There have been a number of steps taken in the policy direction. In 2011, the National Social Protection Policy was agreed by Cabinet, accompanied by a sessional paper on the National Social Protection Policy in 2014. There was already a new international instrument from the International Labour Organization in 2012 that stipulated the social protection floors. We call this the ILO recommendation number 202, which was formalized and agreed by Kenya, thereby providing a globally recognized standard and framework within which the national social protection policy could be embedded. Again, in 2012, we had the Public Service Superannuation Scheme Act, which was passed with the objective of bringing about a transition to a funded basis of the old age provisions for the national civil servants. In 2013, we got the Social Assistance Act, which was passed by Parliament as Act number 24 of 2013. And again, the National Social Security Fund Act was promulgated in 2013 to bring about key reforms within the National Social Security Fund. Now, of course, there is a National Social Coordination Bill that is under review. I think I shared it on the platform, on the WhatsApp group, hoping that it will be able to influence further the direction for social protection. Now, within the law and policy, social protection is defined as follows. Social protection is defined as policies and actions, including legislative measures, policies and actions, including legislative measures that enhance the capacity of, and opportunities for, policies and actions including legislative measures that enhance capacity of and opportunities for the poor and vulnerable to improve and sustain their lives, livelihoods, and welfare, that enable income earners and their dependents to maintain a reasonable level, that enable income earners and their dependents to maintain a reasonable level of income through decent work, and that ensure access to affordable health care, social security, and social assistance. So it is quite a mouthful of a definition there. This definition is contained in the National Social Protection Policy of 2012. Now, the National Social Protection Policy also established 3 pillars for the national social protection system, even though it did not actually define them. It gave 3 pillars: social assistance, social security, and health insurance. Social assistance, social security, and health insurance. Now, social assistance has the key aim of providing direct cash transfers to the poor and vulnerable people over their life cycle. The National Social Protection Policy indicated that transfers could be either targeted at those living in poverty or offered on a universal basis to everyone in a particular category of the population, such as would be the old people. The second pillar, which is social security, has the key aim of offering retirement schemes to informal sector workers and to increase the range and advocacy and adequacy of the National Social Security Fund benefits. So Social Security is targeting retirement schemes for the informal sector workers and to increase the range and adequacy of the NSSF benefits. Now, these could include maternity and employment insurance and work injury benefits arrangements. Because you know the Work Injury Benefits Act is designed to encourage employers, especially in the industrial and plant sectors, huge plant sectors, to set aside an amount of money within an insurance scheme. So several employers are setting aside money within an insurance scheme so that in case an employee is injured in the process of work, then that fund could be drawn upon for purposes of compensating them for the injury. Now, the Work Injury Benefits Act is different from the Occupational Safety and Health Act. One sets rules of how to keep the workplace safe, the other sets rules of how compensation can take place. So this Work Injury Benefits arrangement is also taken care of within the Social Security pillar of the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. So if you are to engage the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, what are you doing about injury of workers? They would say, well, we have the Work Injury Benefits Act. If a worker is injured and they can no longer work, or for an interim period of time, we have an amount of money that can accrue to them. The third pillar is health insurance. This one has the aim of re-establishing the National Hospital Insurance Fund as a fully fledged comprehensive national health insurance scheme that would cover all Kenyans. So this is what the National Social Protection Policy of 2012 put in place as the three pillars, and they still stand as the pillars that we are following. Now, National Social Security had been around for long, maybe pointing out some of the reforms that happened in the National Social Security Fund Act of 2013 would be good. Now, this 2013 Act of the National Security Fund brought a number of changes to the scheme. One, contributions are to be payable by employees and employers at the rate of 6% of earnings, not 5% as had been the case. New minimum and maximum earnings on which contributions are paid increased substantially. The previous ones had been effectively capped at a total of 400 a month. Contributions in the 2013 Act split into Tier 1 and Tier 2 accounts. One to provide benefits on retirement in lump sum, as is the case in the past, and then the other to provide a pension benefit. Again, the 2013 Act of the National Social Security Fund insisted that the pension benefit should, in principle, be realized by annuitizing the accumulated value of Tier 2 account on retirement through what would be called a buyout with an approved life insurance company. Although it appears that annuitization is rarely enforced. Employers have also the option to contract out of Tier 2. They can choose to agree not to be part of the Tier 2 arrangement by offering an approved retirement benefit plan with benefits equal to or better than those provided by the National Social Security Fund Tier 2. A number of employers, when things were still flowing well, had plans for social security or benefit schemes for employers that were a little bit superior to the National Social Security Fund. Okay. So, yeah, I think that's what I wanted to point out about this Social Security. But let's reflect a little bit more on these pillars. Okay. Probably we talk a little bit about what is happening in the area of social assistance. Now, when you look at what has been happening in social, there are two large programs in terms of both beneficiary households and budgets. The fastest growing program, which is entirely financed by the government of Kenya, is what is called the OPCT scheme. And this scheme sorry, where did I write this OPCT scheme? I need to find out how much they are spending. Okay, yeah. So it is the OPCT scheme. And it is attending to close to 41,000 beneficiary households. Then the other is the Hunger Safety Net program that has been funded by DFID. I think this is the British aid agency that is covering up to 100,000 beneficiaries. Then in line comes the Cash and Food for Assets program, which offers transfers to recipients who are also provided with skills and additional inputs to develop or improve communal and household productive assets. There is also support that has been going to refugees, social protection support for refugees. And although not considered in this review, it is true that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the World Food Programme always implement social protection programs in Kenya's 3 refugee camps, which is Kakuma, Dadaab, and Kalobeyei. In a total, around 560,000 people receive support through this refugee scheme. In Kakuma and Dadaab, the support is in both cash and in kind, while those in Kalobeyei receive cash benefits since it has strong links to the market. So the value of the transfer is calculated according to the household composition. And the refugees are also able to undertake small asset creation projects, such as irrigation, agricultural production, and tree planting. Okay. So, general food distribution offers food equivalent to around 1,500 calories in arid areas, 1,000 calories in semi-arid areas, to those who are assessed as living in zones of need. And the transfers are for no more than 1 year's duration, although they may be received for a short period as short as 4 months. It is true that since 2012, the school feeding programs has dropped. And because of this situation, the government explains it by redirecting funds to other programs. But government has shared responsibility with World Food Programs for the meals, with the proportion of children supported by government increasing generally from 38% to 57%. Now, the government homegrown school feeding program transfer funds to school, which then procure the food locally, and in that way they promote the local markets. But while World Food Program school feeding offers children meals for 195 days per year, although occasionally pipeline challenges mean that it is not possible. The government homegrown school feeding program only offers children meals for around 40 to 50 days per year. And the Minister of Education explained this by saying there is an insufficiency of funding and that consideration should be given by government to increase funding so that this scheme becomes more comprehensive. Okay. So some of the schemes of Kenya are restricted. Some schemes are national while others are restricted to particular areas of the country. And in recent years, some county governments have developed their own tax finance social protection schemes, but information is not coming through easily. And that's why I was digging out to find out which counties are actually doing social protection. Because I even checked this very popular county, Makueni, in its National Integrated Development Plan. They mentioned social protection, but you don't seem to see it when it gets to the budgeting. So it might be something that people might pick interest in establishing, really, how the money, whether social protection services have been adapted at the county level and to what extent. Yeah. Government has also invested in strengthening its capacity to respond to emergencies. And the National Drought Emergency Fund has been developed. I think Larry mentioned to that effect, to release shock responsive cash transfers. Many times school feeding is also used as part of an emergency response. So Kenya is gradually developing a cash plus approach to its social protection schemes, although this is in early stages. And then this is accompanied by the contributory schemes that we mentioned earlier: public service, working general benefits, NHIF, and NSSF. So Kenya's overall social protection system currently focuses on addressing needs of two groups: those living in most extreme poverty and the more affluent. The prioritization of those living in extreme poverty has been the result of the limited resources invested in social protection. Despite the expansion of schemes in recent years, furthermore, there are large gaps even among those two groups. As noted above, the National Social Security Fund does not, in fact, offer regular old age and disability benefits to its members. So, because of the allocation as a percentage of GDP, we said most of the allocations are under 1% of GDP. That also reflects that the population covered by many of these schemes is always far less than 0.8% of the population. So I would encourage you to visit the Ministry of Gender and Labor website and figure out these various projects and programs that they are running. the Department of Social Protection. It is an interesting thing to find out how that can be implemented at county level. I'm still searching for which county has both incorporated social protection in its integrated development plan and ends up budgeting for it in any given year. I've not yet succeeded, but I'm still searching. So I'd like us to end here unless you have any questions. Okay, so tuonane wiki ijayo.